Welcome to the Uniquely Texas podcast, where agriculture meets storytelling. I'm your host, Jean Loney Dudley, and I'm excited to get to explore what makes some really special crops in Texas unique. Our goal at Uniquely Texas is to celebrate Texas agriculture and give a little love to some of the crops you might not even know are produced here. As we highlight some very unique things growing in Texas, from azaleas to zucchini, we also want to share the amazing people that are growing these special crops in the communities they help support. Before we get going, I want to share that Uniquely Texas is a project of Tarleton State University's College of Agriculture and Natural Resources with funding through the Texas Department of Agriculture Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. On this episode, it's getting sweet, real sweet. We are going to talk about honey, whether it's from Winnie the Pooh stories, which are almost a daily thing in my life. So I'm constantly singing the honey song, or you're seeing more and more of the liquid gold and its products like honeycomb, beeswax, balm, honey flavored goods. Honey's pretty ubiquitous today. It's everywhere, whether you're in the grocery store, you're at the farmer's market, you're online, maybe reading about what some folks are doing. There is a lot going on, and we're going to talk honey today. But I want to make sure that we do it right because you can't talk honey unless you also touch on the bees that make it. In fact, bees are pretty important across the board, and that's not just with honey. Honey is what we often think of, but in their role as a pollinator, they actually help supply 1 in 3 bites of food that we take. Those are the bites that are reliant on our pollinator friends. So helping the bees not just gets us more honey, it helps everybody on the planet. Honeybees, now we've got a huge expert with us today. So I'm not gonna tell you more than I know or more than I've learned quickly. But honeybees broadly fall into 3 categories. You have the queen, as the name implies, she runs the hive, she runs the show. You have the workers. Now, these are the females that go find the pollen, they build and protect the hive. They clean and circulate the air in the hive by beating their wings, and they're the ones you see flying outside the hive. I found this to be fascinating. So the whole cleaning the hive, beating their wings, keeping everything going. Also, I did not realize I'm this many years old when I realized they were all females. So very interesting. I'm going to say matriarchal for lack of a better term, and our expert probably can help me with that. But this really female driven colony and community that's making all of this happen. Not to diminish the role of our men, they're very important. We have our drones, which are the males, and they have a pretty focused purpose: make more bees. They're working with the queen. They're busy in the spring and summer, and then as you get to fall, as you get to winter, the hive starts to go into more survival mode, and that's when the drones maybe get the boot and aren't as needed. But everybody still has a role. Now we're protecting the food source. Now we're protecting the honey. We're trying to keep everything going. So really interesting. I've got a lot more that I'm going to share as we go through our conversation. I don't want to. I got very intrigued by this, so I've got notes for days on bees. Fascinating sense of smell. That's how they find and recognize the flowers that they need for food, and it helps them communicate in the hive. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how bees communicate and how they talk to each other. But there's one piece that I want to share. As we start to talk about honey, I think this is really pretty neat. A pound of honey is made by 2 million flower visits, with bees flying about 55,000 miles back and forth to make it happen. So I have a new appreciation for that teaspoonful that I'm putting into my tea or what I'm putting into my oatmeal. That's incredible. That's a lot of work to get there. We'll talk more about the benefits of honey and what you can do with it and how it's been used historically as we bring in our expert this week. I am tickled to get to visit with Tara Chapman, the founder of Two Hives Honey over in Manor, Texas. Tara, welcome to Uniquely Texas.
Hi, thank you so much. Glad to be here.
I am tickled to get to visit with you. You've got a really neat backstory. And on top of that, your passion for bees and for honey and what you're doing to make honey. I don't want to say more accessible because it's everywhere, but I would say to really help honey come into its own as a very unique product is really incredible. And we'll talk a bit about that. But if you would, Tara, talk to us a little bit about your background, where you're from, and what you did pre-bees.
Yeah, so I do come from the world of ag, not beekeeping. My granddad was a cotton farmer.
Hmm.
And then had blue collar single mom. The ag skipped a generation and then was planning to skip another because I actually went off to college. I went to the East Coast for school. I'm a native born and bred Texan, went to Duke University, and then ended up working in intelligence with the federal government and worked with the government for a decade, spent a lot of time in Afghanistan and Pakistan in various capacities. And then I had taken a beekeeping class back in Austin. I was splitting my time. This was long before remote work was a thing. I managed to convince the government to let me remote work, which that wasn't even a term, I don't think, back then. And so I was splitting my time between Austin, DC, and Afghanistan. So three different wardrobes at the
Oh
ready.
yeah.
And I took a beekeeping class in Austin and I just fell in love with it. And I was already looking for an exit strategy. I didn't want to continue to go over to Afghanistan. I mean, for a lot of personal reasons, I needed to move on.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'll just do that very naively. I mean, it did work out. But yeah, quit my job with benefits to uh, start a beekeeping business. I had a couple of hives with a friend, um, and within 6 months, I quit my job. So
Oh wow. Yeah.
that's how we got
So
here.
that's from the CIA to the BEE. That's outstanding.
Yeah. Yes.
What a neat story. What is it? Talk a little bit. I mean, that's a really big connection if you're willing to just say, look, I've got this federal government gig, good benefits, all the things. I'm going to go do this. What can you talk a little bit about what just sparked that passion in you? What was that connection?
Yeah, I really wish I could like go back in time and be more present with my feelings and myself and my emotions at the moment because looking back, it just seems like such a crazy idea. I mean, it's not like I had the knowledge base or this. I mean, not only was I not a I had a hive for a couple of months. I wasn't even what I would consider a beekeeper. I also had no idea about what to do to start a business. I mean, it was a huge leap, but I did it very enthusiastically and very energetically. And yeah, I mean, as far as the connection, I've been kind of disillusioned. I was working a lot on, the quote unquote war on terror, had been working in Pakistan and Afghanistan for a long time. I love the Afghan people. One of my friends from Afghanistan, an Afghan, got his civ visa, came to Austin, married my best friend. Like I just have
Oh
very strong
wow.
ties
Yeah.
to this country. But I was just feeling I mean, I'd been in that world for 10 years and it was just I couldn't do it anymore. Wasn't feeling energized by the work and like I was contributing. And that's really important to me. I'm very mission driven. And so I took this beekeeping class and I just walked out of there. I mean, with a bullet point list of crazy facts about bees. Bees do this, and I was just so overwhelmed with joy at all that was happening in colonies that I'm like, how do not more people not know about this? Right. I was
Yeah.
almost like in disbelief of like, how do we not know more about this? And I wasn't even aware that you could be a beekeeper. That's something you could like do in your backyard. So it was
Hmm.
just the first thing in so long that I had been so excited about. And I'm a very passionate person. I will live and die by my passion. And it was just the first thing I'd been excited about for so long. And then um, my honey harvest for that first year were so different. And I learned, of course, different flowers make different honey, which I didn't know that when I started the beehive.
Yeah.
So I had this idea that wouldn't it be cool if every neighborhood in Austin had its own honey? So that's kind of
Hmm.
the unique idea that I wanted to pull and really kind of what I set off to do. And then from there, it just blew up in a lot of different ways. I've traveled a lot of most beekeepers that do this full time professionally do lots of things, and you kind of have to pay the
Yeah.
bills.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you bring up that I'm going to say taste of place through honey. The bees are out, they're finding these pollen sources, they're finding flowers, they're coming back and you're right, it really does change from where they are. And if you think about, there are some places that are really famous for this. So if you think New Zealand, every time we have guests from New Zealand, they bring us Manuka honey.
Mm-hmm.
That is the big thing, and that is all that the bees get to eat. That's all the pollen they have. That's what they bring in. But even here, you've got mesquite honey, you've got wildflower honey, and it's all different. The coloring may be different. The flavor is different. I'm not from Texas, so honey from home looks and tastes just a little bit
Mm-hmm.
different. That's amazing to me. We think
Yeah.
of it as sort of one product, but it's really not. It's so very local.
Yeah. The grocery store tells us it is a commodity. And in that sense it is. I mean, it is
Hmm.
sold and bought as a commodity in terms of like everything being homogeneous and the same, and the quality is, not great. But it's because what you find at the grocery store, well, a couple of things. One, okay, let's first assume it's real honey. There's a very decent chance it's not. Honey is one of the top three most adulterated products in the US behind milk and olive oil. And so may not be real honey, cut with cheap sweeteners because honey's expensive to produce. Comes from China. It's very common. So if it's real honey, it has most certainly been heavily heated, pasteurized, and they do that to keep it from crystallizing. Then it's all the same, be able to move it between vessels, because real raw honey will crystallize. That is a
Hmm.
sign of real raw honey. And then also, it's blended. So when you're buying honey in the grocery store, and now when I say grocery, I mean, we're in all seven area, Austin area Whole Foods, right? You can find these small local brands, but generally speaking, at the big box stores, what you're seeing on the shelves is from honey packers. So even like if the brand is local, it's often they're honey packers. They're not actually beekeepers, or they might supplement what their bees produce with honey bought from others. So what that means is they're buying honey, usually from Brazil, Mexico, and Canada. It doesn't even come from the US. And it's all mixed together. So that also lends itself to this idea of this quote unquote honey flavor, is because it's blended, pasteurized, which takes the quality down, alters the flavor. And that's why we have this quote unquote honey flavor that we think of. Whereas when honey is treated, the way that I think it and the bees deserve, but it's harvested in small batches. Um, you get different colors, flavors, textures. They crystallize at different rates. Some actually may never crystallize based on the composition. I mean, you really have this rainbow. It can range from very sweet to more bitter than coffee. So when people say, I don't like honey, I always have a chuckle because there's so many different kinds and flavors and
Yeah.
varietals.
And it's interesting. One of the things that I was reading, and you can check me on this if it's correct or not. Well, bigger picture, honey actually is not only a wonderful food, it's got a lot of healing properties because it's antibacterial, it's antimicrobial, it's anti-inflammatory. So there's a lot you can do with it. Historically, it's been used on cuts and burns, and it would be used in wound care. Um, from folks, gosh, for as long as
Yeah.
bees have been around, probably. But
Yeah.
it
I mean,
also that
ancient Egyptians were using honey in a lot of medicinally type ways. Beeswax was used in magic. There was a official in the government. There was an official beekeeper, a member of the government that was responsible for the harvest every year. That's how important
oh
it was in
wow.
ancient Egypt.
Yeah. So I'm glad I wouldn't have gone back that far. I'm really glad you stepped in and shared that because I think it's really the history of it is quite powerful when you look at how it was treated and where it's appeared. Um, One of the things that I was interested in, and I bring it up because you mentioned the color. So honey is 25% sweeter than sugar, but it also has antioxidant properties. And sometimes that can range a little bit with that coloring. So if it's really dark, it has a bit more. If it's really light, it might have a fewer. I had no idea.
Yeah,
And I know.
I don't know if typically, generally speaking, darker honeys tend to have more polyphenols.
Mhm.
I don't know if that is a hard and fast rule, but generally speaking, that is
Okay.
what we tend to see and find, that darker honeys tend to be more medicinally um, beneficial. But yeah, they can be, on our website, we have a blog, and I'm very into, I mean, beekeeping, I think out of a lot of things tends to be this area where something gets said at one point and it's treated as fact, and then it's just treated as fact for forever.
Yeah.
And I try to avoid that as much as I can. So we've got a blog on the website that links to studies that have been done that demonstrate, for example, that honey has been found to be better than over-the-counter cough medicine for children. It's been found to be very good for stomach ailments for children, very good for wound care. So I've linked these studies to demonstrate, what we've actually found in science that really, and it has to be raw honey, right? It can't be pasteurized,
Yeah.
but raw honey has a lot of health benefits.
And you mentioned, Tara, the crystallizing piece, but that's not really a big deal. If your honey crystallizes, it's still good. You can still use it. You can worm it. There are some things you
Yeah,
can do, correct?
yeah, it's not gone bad for sure. I mean, honey can ferment. There's this notion that it never goes bad. That's not exactly true. So it all comes down to the water content. So bees
Hmm.
will dehydrate nectar from flowers down to 18.5% water or less. At that ratio, generally speaking, you have a product without a shelf life. But a lot of things can happen if the honey's left open and is allowed to absorb a lot of moisture. But anyway, for all intents and
Yeah.
purposes, right, it doesn't have a shelf life. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Help me.
No, well, when it crystallizes, what I
Crystallizes.
don't
Yes,
want to
thank you.
see is somebody go, "Oh, that
Yes.
crystallized, I gotta chuck it." You
Yes.
don't.
Yes. Yes. So yes. So yeah. So I was saying that honey can ferment. It looks very different from crystallizing. It actually bubbles up out of the jar and like the lid can explode off
Oh,
of the
wow.
jar. But crystallization, the honey has not gone bad. In fact, that is what happens to real raw honey. So you can eat it like that. You can lightly heat it. You can be real careful here. You don't want to pasteurize it, right? You want to heat it
Hmm.
above 100 degrees. So I tell people to put a pot of, you can boil the water on the stove, but then take it off the heat and put the honey in. But it's just a sign that you got real raw honey. And I was actually just every year about this time, because there's four different attributes that play a role in like how quickly a honey will crystallize, and one of them is temperature. And so as people have their honey sitting out, their house might get cold as we move into winter. This time of year is always when we share our like Instagram PSA, like your honey has not gone bad, right? And I was just sharing with our followers on Instagram a few days ago when we shared this post, is that when I first started beekeeping, I was at a market and a gentleman, a beekeeper, came up to me and he picked up a jar of honey that was crystallized, and he chastised me and he told me, "This is bad. You really shouldn't be selling it like this." So what he was saying was, a lot of beekeepers work hard to keep their honey liquid for the point of sale, which
Hmm.
makes 0% sense to me, because at least at point of sale, you're looking at it and you have the opportunity to ask me, right,
Yeah.
to educate you. But if I work so hard to liquefy it, one, it's a lot of extra work. It is going to crystallize. So if I work to keep it
Hmm.
liquid, I sell it to you, you take it home, I lose my opportunity to educate you. It is going to crystallize in your house later. And now you do think that something is
Yeah.
wrong with it. I would
Yeah.
much prefer to sell it crystallized so it's not changing, shape later and then give you
Yeah.
pause or question about, did I get sold something bad? And then I never see you again.
Yeah. And it really has been interesting to me. We talked about family before we started to record, and we've both got youngsters about the same age. Honey is a go-to for her for so much stuff, and it's really been neat. I actually have come. We almost always have one that's crystallized, and I love that because it's easier to stir into stuff. I can put it in tea. I've
It's not as
actually come to,
messy.
yeah, I like that because it's easier when I'm putting it into something else and I don't need it in that liquid form. And that was not the case, years ago, I didn't know any different. So it's
Yeah.
really cool to see too. Now you can go out and some stores are maybe a little bit more thoughtful on this on others of trying to bring in some local beekeeper products
Hmm.
because every once in a while you can go and you'll even find like some honeycomb. That's been a treat that we bring home once in a while is if we can find some honeycomb to have. And again, I feel like when I was younger, this was all out there, but you didn't see it as much. And I'm really happy that the products are coming back, the art and the science of it, because it is both. You're talking about moisture percentages and what you do and how you do all of this work. There really is art and science when you're in both the beekeeping side and managing the honey. Can you talk a little bit about that process, Tara, of you getting trained and now as part of what you do at Two Hives Honey, you're training other beekeepers. So what's that journey been like to come from these bees are amazing. I want to get into this. I'm going to sell the honey. And now you're really paying it forward because you're bringing new people in and helping them grow and learn and do this at home.
Yeah, we do. I mean, really, what we do is educate. We
Mhm.
sell honey and we do tours and fun experiences, but really, underneath all of this is just we're educating. We're educating the general public about honey, educating beekeepers, educating about native bees, which is really important to me. And I consider it a really important part of our mission to make sure people understand what native bees are as compared to, the European honeybees that actually produce their honey for us. Yeah, the education piece is my favorite part of what we do. Um, I enjoy bringing the brand newbie that walks in the door that was me, 12 years ago and watching their faces light up when they're like learning. I mean, we talk about bee sex, and the bee sex is so crazy and so metal. And I really love watching that face. And then I also really love, we have this immersive beekeeping experience apprenticeship program. And I really love that because I love getting the newbies, but then I love when I have the opportunity for someone who is going to invest in this in a way that allows me to see them over many months, over many hours, so that we're not just skimming the top. We're really able to dive deep because my philosophy is that I'm not going to teach you, we're, you're going to learn to be a beekeeper, but we are going to talk a whole lot about bee biology first. And that was the
Yeah.
whole reason, I have a book coming out next week. And one of my arguments to my publisher was that we need to do a better job of putting the bee biology up front, understanding and learning what does a colony look like in the wild so that we can best mimic that when we're
Hmm.
doing that in our backyards or on our farms. And not everybody handles it that way. In fact, when I go to
Yeah.
bee schools, I'm the one that's always pushing, 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 pushing. You know, we need to be talking more about biology because out of that, you become a better beekeeper. If we start with
Yeah.
the beekeeping, you're never going to be a good beekeeper. You just
Yeah.
aren't if you don't understand the biology.
Well, and to be able, as we would do, say on the cattle side, we've evolved so much to everything's done with the thought of comfort, care, and calmness of the animal. Well, it's not any different with bees. How do we mimic what they would have in the wild? How do we be thoughtful of how to approach them and work with them? And that's a really good point of, it makes everybody better and it keeps the bees happier.
Yeah, honeybees are such an interesting dynamic because we talk about, honeybees are not domesticated in the way like that horses or goats are,
Hmm.
right? Like they don't recognize us. And then you also have the nuance of that you can't think of the individual bees of the organism. The colony itself is the organism, this idea of the superorganism. So there's just so much nuance. And all of these tens of thousands of bees are there, and all of their behavior is driven by dozens and dozens of pheromones, the presence of a pheromone, the lack of a pheromone. And so, what beekeepers do and do not do can have huge impacts on the colony. And yet, if you don't understand that, to you,
Yeah.
it may seem like you're not really doing much, but it could be a huge intrusion and can totally alter the course of your colony if you don't understand how your actions are affecting those behaviors based on the introduction or the pulling out of different pheromones.
Yeah. So I'm going to admit a very odd thing. In college, I had to take an elective, and my roommate said, "Oh, I signed up for this class. You should take it with me." And I said, I don't even know what that title means. She said, it's fine, just take it. And so I found myself in apiology and apiculture my junior year of college, which is bees and beekeeping. And it was it is a class I wish I could go back and take as an adult because I didn't appreciate it and I just made my way through it. And I didn't take the lab, which I should have. Um, but it was fascinating. To this day, I still remember learning about the waggle dance and that we all had to figure, we all were told where a flower source was, and we had to create the waggle dance to tell the
Uh,
rest of the room. So would you share? I am not going to attempt to explain it with you. That's my, my restaurant conversation when I'm stuck for chat. But will you tell folks what's a waggle dance and how do bees communicate?
Yeah, so bees communicate via pheromones, which we talked about. They give and receive a lot of communication through their antennae, and then they also communicate through dance. So this little dance called the waggle dance is how they both use it to find and share food sources with their sisters.
Mhm.
And also during swarming season, a honeybee swarm is basically when a colony has divided into two, and we can make two colonies out of one. And the bees that leave the colony with the queen, the original queen, are looking for a new home. Before they find that new home, they rest somewhere. And so the waggle dance comes into play as they're out apartment hunting. They come back and report the houses they found. Everyone goes, looks at them, and then we'll vote through the dance. So the waggle dance is used in those two different ways.
Amazing.
And the waggle dance is a bee will move in a figure-8 motion on the beeswax comb. And remember, this is all done typically in complete darkness. So you have to feel the vibrations through the beeswax comb. So she'll move in a figure-8 motion. When she gets to the middle of the figure-8, she does the waggle, which is basically just bouncing her abdomen back and forth very, very quickly. Then she'll continue on her figure-8. When she gets to the middle, she will do the waggle once again. So the amount of time the waggle lasts tells the bees the distance of the food or the potential new home to the colony. So short waggle, short distance, long waggle, long distance. And then the angle of the dance to the angle of the sun tells the bees the angle of the sun to as relative to the new home or the food source. And with these metrics, yes, someone that really knows this, like scientists can look at this and can identify where they're collecting food or what the potential new home site is based on those two metrics. And of course, the
That's
waggle dance will
amazing.
change. I was teaching class once, and there was a little girl in the class, and she was British, and she had glasses, which made me already super intimidated by the intelligence of this like 5-year old. And I was saying, and the dance will change because as the sun moves through the sky, and the dance will shift. And she raised her hand, and she was like, "Excuse me, just so you know, the sun doesn't rotate around the earth, and we learned that a long time ago." And I was like, "Fair enough, you are correct. I should rephrase that."
But we get your point. Yeah.
Yes.
And it really, so that's the swarm piece. I have a question on that. So you've got this hive and it's out in nature doing its thing, and all of a sudden they decide, nope, we're going to split. We're going to go be two. How do they make that decision, and what triggers it? And then if the queen goes with that new hive and they're going to go find a new house and set up shop, how do you get a queen in the hive that stays behind?
There's still a lot that we don't know or understand about the swarming process, but what we do know is that going back to these pheromones, what triggers so to answer your second question first, when the colony splits, the original queen will stop laying. They put her on like a sort of a diet so she gets a little skinnier so she can fly, and she will fly and leave with the bees and then go make a new home elsewhere. The bees that are left behind will rear a new queen. So they can actually select a worker bee egg, a female egg, and as soon as it hatches into a larva, they feed that larva a special diet. It's related to royal jelly. And this is a very oversimplified explanation, but they'll binge feed this little larva, and in that sense, a diet change will create a queen bee from a worker bee because biological they are different. Now, queens are very territorial, and so you wouldn't have, generally speaking, you would have one queen in one colony. And so
Mhm.
what happens is they know their queen's alive and well because of her pheromones. So her
Yeah.
pheromones spread throughout the colony, and it keeps them that keeps them from starting to produce new queens. When you have that pheromone not present throughout the colony, either because she's died or she's growing sick or a beekeeper squished her, or it's a really crowded colony and there's lots of bees in there, really booming colony, that pheromone doesn't permeate as well. That starts the queen rearing process and signals to the bees that now we're going to swarm. Now, as to how that communication happens, I've not been able to find anyone that has a lot of information on like who decides who leaves and who
Yeah.
stays. But that's how that happens. And so it's that, again, that pheromone. So in a really crowded colony, when you can spare thousands of bees to go make a new colony,
Mhm.
the inability of that pheromone to permeate because it's too crowded in here will start the rearing of queens, and then they'll split.
And Tara, does that, so one of the things you mentioned was really interesting to me, and you talked about native bees. Are those processes the same, or talk a little bit about native bees? Because I guess knowing a little bit about, some of the bees that are out there, that's not a distinction I think of on a daily basis. So would you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and most people don't. So there's 20,000 species of bees in the world. Literally a few dozen make honey. So
Oh,
the ones
wow.
that we all know the most about is literally a few dozen species. So most all of the other bees in the world are actually solitary bees. So there's a couple thousand of these that are native to the United States. I think there's something like 800 that are native to Texas. Um, and again, so honeybees, the ones that we tend to think of are not native to the US. They were brought to the US by European settlers in the 1600s. So they were
Mhm.
brought here for the products that they use. They are very important for our food system, which we can come back to later. So they're
Mhm.
very, very important, but they are not native. But we have dozens and dozens of species of native bees that call Texas home. So, you've got your bumbles, your longhorn bees, your mason bees, leafcutters. There's too many to name, but all of these, with the exception of bumbles, are solitary. They don't live in colonies like honeybees do. Bumblebees do live in colonies, but very tiny colonies, like 200 to 300 bees, whereas a honeybee colony might be 50,000 bees pretty easily.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. And so would they still go through, and you said there aren't as many that produce honey, so the natives may still help in the pollination
Oh,
process,
yes, for sure.
but not necessarily producing honey that we're going to enjoy.
Yes. Bumblebees make honey, but very teeny bits. And so this
Yeah.
like notion of like producing honey is because we have lots of mouths to feed and many generations that continue to live on for
Hmm.
years and years, right? So when you're a bumblebee colony of 2 to 300 bees, they do make a little bit of honey, but again, they have a very small colony to feed. Honeybees, theoretically, a colony can live forever, and they only have access to food very short periods of the year. So they have to dehydrate, cure this nectar to make it into this product that has no shelf life. So they
Yeah.
also can eat on it during the lean times. But solitary bees, like mason bees or longhorn bees, for example, um, they don't live in big colonies. They really just have to take care of themselves and their
Yeah.
6 to 8 young that they will, their 6 to 8 legs they'll lay on a little drop of pollen and nectar. And then they go off to finish their lives. Their seasons are very short. So they don't have to,
Mhm.
you know, I always like to use the example of like making honey is kind of like canning fruits and
Yeah.
vegetables, right?
Yeah.
They don't have to stock the pantry because they don't have thousands of bees to feed, but they're very important for pollination. In fact, you've got a lot of specialists in the native bee world, whereas specific bees are required to pollinate certain plants. So, like
Oh,
bumblebees,
interesting.
for example, are very good at pollinating tomato plants.
Yeah.
There's squash bees that will pollinate squash plants. So there's a lot of specialists like that leaf cutters in particular are very good at pollinating alfalfa. So
That's fascinating. How very Texas that there is a longhorn bee as
I
well.
know. I always like to mention that one for my husband, the longhorn.
That's fantastic. Now, we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about Two Hives Honey because you do some really unique things there. I had the chance years ago to stop by. We were doing an educational display, and y'all were kind enough to donate some comb that we could put in a display for kids to learn more about agriculture. And it was fascinating what all you do there. Looking at the website, so you've got your beekeeper classes, you've got the book that's for sale on the website, you've got tours and tastings. So it's almost, a sommelier type experience, but with honey. So working through all of those, as we talked about, the different flowers give different coloring, different flavoring, different, medicinal properties. So you've got that going on. You've got corporate events, which I thought was just wonderful. So education and outreach, even to that group that's coming and trying to learn something new and work together. You've even got honeygrams, which I love the concept of. Talk a little bit about when I look at it, what I took away from all of that is you're trying to help people experience honey. Can you talk a little bit about that and why you're doing it, what you're seeing, and maybe how that's been growing?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of agritourism. This idea of right bringing, whether it's B2B, breaking out the Googles and the Facebooks in the world, or small companies, or just people coming out buying the tickets on a public tour tasting. Because again, it all goes back to that education component of that. If we can take something that people tend to love already, honey, although they probably don't realize how much more it could be loved.
Mhm.
If you love grocery store honey, wow, do I have a surprise for you. And so if we can take something they love already and then kind of use that as bait, if you will, right? To now, while I've got you, let me help you understand and appreciate like the value of this and how it's all of the work that goes into it and the incredible like fascination, right, associated with it. Then it doesn't just stop there, right? Now that I've got your attention, I'd also like to share with you about native bees. And also, I'd like to broadly paint a picture of our food system and why bees are important to our food system, but also all of the people involved in this food system. And they are also very special, very important. And we need to understand more about what our farmers, ranchers, beekeepers do to put food on the plate. Like, I'm very passionate about making people appreciate the animals and the organisms and the people more that are responsible for. So it's like taking that honey and then just weaving that weave all the way through, which were really what I want you to appreciate is like how incredibly rewarding it is to produce food, but how incredibly hard it is, and how we should really
Yeah.
value food and the people, because food is medicine and medicine is food. And I will believe that. I know, I don't believe that. I know that. I know the
Mhm.
power of good food and what it can do for you. And I want more people to have access to it. So yeah, there's a lot there, but I'm just so passionate about this in an entire world. And it all for us just starts with like bringing someone in who's like saw a fun photo on Instagram, or friend is a foodie and they're inspired by that, by wanting to come in and learn more about honey.
Yeah. It's been incredible to me. And one of the reasons that we wanted to do this podcast is we're really lucky in Texas with what we produce and what's here locally. I've had my first experiences with figs here in Texas because we have a big old fig tree in the backyard, and I am learning what they look like when you pick them and when to pick them and what to do with it. I loved seeing on your website, one of the other things that I saw is you've got some unique things for sale. And one of them was Yopon tea. We
Mhm,
just recorded an episode on Yopon and talking about that and what's available. And
mhm,
there are these pieces that have truly been medicinal and historical for ages, and we're rediscovering them. They're having a bit of a renaissance. And I think honey is one of those things. I'm so glad you had the history of it, from the Egyptians all the way
mhm.
to today, and what we're doing to really reconnect with it and regain that value for it is incredible. I have a very random question on that note, and this is something that I read, and I'd love for you to tell me if it's accurate or not. Um, don't use metal spoons to spoon out your honey or put it in your tea. Use wood because it helps not change the properties of the honey. Is that accurate, or is it just maybe not a
So
fact but a good idea?
yeah, I wouldn't. I don't love to store honey in metal lids and jars, but the contact that a spoon's gonna have with the honey before it like gets into your mouth is not is not going to matter. But yeah,
Okay.
don't love when you do store honey in like a mason jar with a metal top that doesn't have the like parasol liner. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying?
Yeah.
We do have to be careful because it will add a metallic taste to the honey. But as far as like scooping it out with a spoon, I don't have to worry about that. Though it does, I mean, when we do our honey sensory classes, where we're not just doing a honey tasting, but we're actually guiding you through how your brain interprets flavor because it's so much more than
Hmm.
taste. We do use these little mother of pearl oyster spoons
Oh, interesting.
because metal and wood do add, they add to the flavor of what you're getting. And this
Yeah.
kind of plastic, we don't love plastic, and the mother of pearl we can wash and reuse,
Yeah.
adds the least amount of like, flavor interference with the honey. So that's fun.
Oh, that's awesome. That's fascinating.
They're
So
little
if,
caviar spoons, actually.
oh, that's pretty neat. So if somebody was interested in coming to you and having these experiences, they can look at the website and find more information. What what can we do, just generally speaking, to be better partners or maybe more appreciative of bees?
Yeah, I think that the great thing is that if you come out for an experience, it's very fun for you, and you're doing so much because you're learning, and you're going to leave like, our 5-star review on Google is because people just when they leave, they're so excited about it because it's really fun. So like getting an education is great because then you're going to share with your neighbors. My son is 3 and he's always telling people like what I don't need to be scared of bees. So the education piece is really important. Supporting your local, and not just your local beekeepers, but supporting the people in your area locally that are producing food, because whether they're farming tomatoes or they're a beekeeper, they're probably your local farmers and ranchers and beekeepers are doing more in terms of like more sustainable practices that are better for the environment, be it, the animal, the soil health, water conservation, and all of that. This is all a closed system, right? Like it's all related. It all goes back to helping bees. And then, really, on the bigger picture level, supporting politicians and people in office that believe and understand that this stuff is important, right? So you can use your dollars to support your local beekeepers, rangers, and then use your vote to say, we believe in climate change, we believe in saving the earth, we believe in making more sustainable choices, and how can we make that easier for everyone? If you're talking about in your backyard, like don't use pesticides. This is actually one that a lot of people don't think about. Try not to buy your plants at the big box stores. Most all of the plants and seeds have been treated with neonicotinoids, which is a really highly toxic pesticide. So shopping at your local nurseries, they're
Mhm.
typically not using that. In Texas, it's kind of unique because I might get this law wrong, but I believe it's that you cannot take fruit trees across county lines in Texas unless they've been sprayed. And so you might go to your local nursery, like the nursery in Austin that I always go to, nothing of theirs is treated, but the fruit trees have to be by law. And so they
Mhm.
have signs up that say, pull all of the flumes off of this plant for the first 2 years to
Yeah.
try to give time for the pesticides to work its way out, because those pesticides will come back year after year and the pollen and the nectar to harm the bees.
Yeah, and that's a great point on the value of the local landscape and nurseries to go to. We're fortunate in this area. We've got a couple, and you and I are not geographically too far apart right now. And there are a couple of really good ones that I know we like to go to for some
Mhm.
native plants to put in, and have really become increasingly aware of what we can plant to support our pollinators. And everywhere we go, I think it's almost a game now as we drive across the country. We get honey from a lot of different states to try it and have some
Mhm.
fun with it. So
Mhm.
um, a lot you can do, and I think a lot to be thoughtful about, to your point of, this concept of food as medicine is going to keep coming up, and what we eat and how we eat it, but also that closed loop. What we do on the food side impacts everything. It's
Mhm.
soil, it's animals, it's people, it's health, it's all of those things. And trying to shorten the food system and be more thoughtful of its sustainability really is a fantastic idea. And it's something all of us can do in some way, shape, or form. And incredible how important the bee is in all of that, whether that's our
Mhm.
friends that are making honey, or our friends that are, to your point, ones that, hey, I'm a really good pollinator on tomatoes, or let me get over to
Mhm.
the squash. Really incredible how we can help support that. Thank you so much for the chance to visit with you today. If you're interested, you want to find out more information, go online at twohiveshoney.com. Y'all are located in Manor, Texas, so just outside of Austin. If you want to come for those tours and tastings, that corporate event, or if you're picking up the passion and you want to go do an apprenticeship, learn how to be a beekeeper with Tara and her team, check out the honeygrams as well. I love that.
Mhm.
That's a really neat way that you can ship some honey to folks. And take a look at the website as well. We've got the beekeeping handbook that you said's for sale now and coming out. And we're also going to post, there are some really neat things that I found out there as well. The Nat Geo Kids has a wonderful link on information about honeybees that we'll make available as well. As always, you can check us out online at uniquely-texas.com. And we want to say thanks to Tara again for the sweet visit, all of the information and sharing the buzz on Texas honey and Texas bees. The next time you see those friends floating around, don't get panicked. They're just doing their job. So stay calm, say hi, and send them on their merry way. Tara, thanks so much. We really appreciate your passion and all of your insight.
Thank you.